If I was to ask you who controls your money, so many of you would reply to me, I do, Ali. And it was very clear when I made this video, lots of people thought that it was only people on benefits that the new government powers affected, particularly when I told you about the Fraud, Error and Recovery Act. Well, there's been an update to that act, and this affects everybody that has a bank account, everybody that has wages, self-employment income, benefits, a pension, basically anybody with a bank account that takes or uses any type of public authority funding. And when I dropped this video a few days ago, lots of people were making the mistake about thinking this was about avoiding showing what you actually have. That is not at all the case. The reason I created that video is all about control. Because if you keep your money in a bank, you may think that you have complete control over that money, but that is not the case. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you why, with the new FEAR Act, why everyday people and even businesses need to be keeping much better evidence. And if you stay to the end, I'm going to be telling you about a true life nightmare situation that happened in my business and how we dealt with it. So first of all, if you don't know me, hello, my name is Ali. I'm the founder of the Justice Journals. I used to work once for DWP. I'm now an award-winning author, and I'm actually a business owner of over 20 years. So I know an awful lot about money, businesses and government systems, and most importantly, government policies, because they do infiltrate and really tell us what we can and we cannot do in every aspect of our life, which is why I like to keep reading their policies and make sure that I know about all of the updates. And when there are changes, you're the guys that I'm going to tell first. Because whether you're going to work, whether you're building a business, or maybe you're just getting by with a little bit of benefit money, I like to help people really improve their personal situation and improve their financial independence. Because without that, we don't have very much. Okay, so this is the little beast that has had such a big impact on everybody's lives, and come October, we'll have even more, because actual real life bank recovery action can now start. And that's without you even being served with a CCJ or being taken to court. And just in case I get somebody in the comments going, oh, this is scaremongering, here it is, straight from the horse's mouth, or should I say the government's new updates on their policy, recovery from bank accounts, recovery and enforcement mechanisms, disqualification from driving, and all the rest. So we can all safely agree that that is there. It is now part of our law, of our government system, and you need to know about it. So let me tell you all about it. So for those of you that do not know, the FEAR Act, as it's called, the Fraud, Error and Recovery Act, was published last year by the UK government. It is a new law, and it gives certain public authorities extensive power like they've never had before. Now, they say it's to eliminate fraud and to make sure there is no benefit fraud, NHS fraud, public spending fraud, to recover money that is owed without more expense to the justice system. And lastly, and more damningly, it is a new law that now gives certain public authorities the right to request information about you from third parties, such as your bank. Now, this new act doesn't just rely on one power. There are actually multiple aspects to this. I do have a complete playlist, which you can find here. So I'm going to be going over the four main pillars in this act, what they are and how and where they affect you. So the first one is something called eligibility verification. This first power is about checking somebody's entitlement. That could be entitlement to benefits, entitlement to free NHS care, entitlement to free prescriptions, entitlement to discretionary housing benefit, help from your local council, help from your local authority. And because of that, there is now something called an eligibility verification notice, an EVN, that these organisations can serve on your bank. An EVN is a legal notice that can be issued, for example, to a financial institution, i.e. your bank, to check certain criteria and what they would say eligibility verification criteria. Now, this is not the same as a fraud investigation, and I'm going to go into this little nuance a little bit later on in the video, because that nuance, which does seem to be sometimes very misunderstood on both sides, is causing a lot of problems for everyday innocent people. Now, organisations like DWP say that EVNs help them to identify situations where perhaps somebody is no longer entitled to something that that person says they are eligible for. Same applies for the NHS, council and all the rest. Now, recently, the government have produced a response to quite a lot of concerns about this Fear Act, and in particular, the ICO even got involved. That's the Information Commissioner's Office in London. And primarily, that was all around code of conduct, GDPR and data protection. Now, interestingly enough, the government said that they are not going to publish the precise details of the eligibility indicators that would be used by financial institutions to identify relevant accounts, as they say this could enable individuals intent on committing fraud to circumvent the measure. And that you can see here. But then, interestingly enough, they then state a few paragraphs later that the government has been clear that EVM information will feed into business as usual processes for reviewing a person's claim where necessary. And then here comes the part as well where everyone who is worried about GDPR and data protection, it says here, as EVM is a data gathering measure, which is what I kind of said it was all along, that feeds into business as usual processes, no additional safeguards have been included. And that's because they say by law, and that would be, I should imagine, they haven't specifically stated, but I should imagine that's GDPR and data protection. They say by law, DWP must only issue an EVN if it is necessary and proportionate to do so. Now, as they stated, part of the EVN process is relative to fraud investigations and to eliminate fraud, which is obviously a good thing. And then, of course, they refer to reasonable grounds, necessity and proportionality in the section relating to fraud, DWP obtaining information to support fraud investigations in the welfare system. Well, I think it's quite concerning that there's only been, apparently, 22 online responses and 15 email responses on a topic that affects so many claimants. Let me know, by the way, in the comments if you received any invitation to this open consultation, or if you even knew that you were being asked to consult on this as a user of any of the services mentioned. Now, whilst everybody's talking about, oh my gosh, I've been questioned about why did I spend £2.27 at 10 o'clock at night at One Stop by my Universal Credit work coach, after you were asked for bank statements, I think it's quite, well, I don't know quite what to think about this. Because I'm reading one lot of I'm reading information here, and then you guys are telling me something different. So the government considers that the code already provides a sufficiently clear definition of what constitutes necessary and proportionate and reasonable suspicion of fraud. I would not consider someone spending £2.37 or whatever I just said at one stop a potential reason to report somebody for fraud. So the question I ask is, why is taxpayers' money being used to recruit or employ quite ill-advanced civil servants to do this type of questioning? Because if you look a little bit further on here, it does say it's important to note that it is the DWP or authorised officers' responsibility to determine what constitutes a reasonable suspicion of fraud before issuing an information notice to an information provider, and that could be your bank. Now, lots of you again are saying to me in the comments, well, my bank has a duty to me. They don't have the right to release my information to organisations like DWP. But actually, the minute you place your money or your funds, whatever they are, in a bank, then they are mandated to comply with financial regulations. And that can mean all sorts of things, including not even letting you go forth with any types of transactions. We've seen that horror story where people have tried to withdraw a few £1,000s from their bank, and it almost feels like an MI5 investigation as to what do they want to withdraw their own money from with the bank. Now, before I go into the horror story that I actually had, which is going to be very interesting for some of you, I'm going to point out here that banks cannot refuse. Any financial organisation cannot refuse. In fact, it's under section 111 of the Social Security Administration Act of 1992 that intentionally delaying or obstructing DWP in the exercise of these powers can constitute a criminal offence, which is why I always tell you guys to comply. Even if you haven't done anything wrong, obviously, and you feel, well, I shouldn't have to give them this. This is why I say to you, you have to give the bank statements, but there is a way of communicating that. That's why the letters are important. Okay, you can't just not comply. Non-compliance can, run you into serious issues. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm going to tell you about something that I personally experienced, which made me think very carefully about not just my personal income, but my business income as well. And maybe this will be a lesson for some of you, because it was definitely a lesson for me. So a few months ago, I logged into my online bank on my phone, and across my banking screen was this great big red block, and basically I wasn't able to put any large amounts of money in. I wasn't allowed to withdraw any money really over like 20 or 30 quid. And this was not just my personal account, this was all of my business bank accounts, all of my personal accounts, all of my savings accounts. I was, where in the world, what the hell's going on? No notification, nothing at all. Now, my books had just gone to #1, and I needed to buy thousands of pounds worth of stock, because I had, as some of you will know because you bought them, a whole list of orders sitting on my website to dispatch. And if any of you will know, there was an email that went out to you saying there is a problem right now and there's going to be a delay on the dispatch. What had actually happened was that my company had been maliciously reported by somebody who had not complied by my terms and conditions, and they were removed from my services. Now, their report was entirely malicious. They told really a complete pack of lies to their bank. But because of there is fraud prevention and fraud protection protocol that kicks in, the bank was obliged to investigate. Luckily, I could, and obviously I did, answer the questions. And I was really very annoyed that they had done this, because what had happened was on the back of a simple comments that had just been written down and sent in to this person's bank, all of this action had been taken across all of my bank accounts. No proof, nothing at all. Just what they believed as a disgruntled consumer who had been removed from my services. Long story short, I had no real access for about I think it was about 7 days in total at the end of the year and also month end. That caused a lot of problems for my company. So obviously the bank apologized. They said we have to, oblige by protocol. They did compensate me and my company. So thank you very much for that. But then what actually happened to that individual was that I took legal action against them, or my company took legal action against them. So that's kind of a bit of a reverse way of seeing perhaps how fraud prevention can actually be kind of turned on its head. And if I hadn't have had evidence, if I hadn't have had invoices, orders from you guys, if I hadn't have had emails where we had written to this person, say you've breached the terms and conditions, tra la 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 la, where would I have been? I tell you where I would have been. I would have been up the Swanee without a paddle, which was why after that we completely changed the financial infrastructure of my company. And also in my personal life as well. I actually considered after that point me having or keeping all of our financial assets in the bank massive risk. There's no way I could think anything else. Honest to God, I don't think I slept for 2 days, and I was just thinking, what on earth? So I hadn't been asked any questions until this had happened, and all I received was a simple little email, and then I had to respond to these questions. Meanwhile, everything in my personal life and my business life on hold. I couldn't actually even pay myself, because the amount, that I was paying myself was over what their £20 or £30 limit, obviously. You imagine how that can then have a massive knock-on effect in somebody's life. So this video here is not about hiding anything. It's about having control over your own financial income. Okay, so the next section is recovery. Now, as you know, I am an absolute stickler for evidence, and it's now gone into obviously financial evidencing. It's not just health evidencing anymore. It's financial evidencing and, quite frankly, system evidencing. Because once organisations like DWP and other organisations can simply instruct, as they can now, the police to come to your house, seize goods, do whatever they want to do without a court order, which is what they can now do with this Fear Act, given the complications that we had at that point, I think this is really quite concerning if you don't have evidence, because data only says one thing about a transaction. It says that transaction happened, but it doesn't tell you the context of that situation. And here you can clearly see here there are recovery and enforcement mechanisms, recovery from bank accounts. You can even be disqualified from driving if you don't comply with invoices, I suppose, or debts that they say you owe. There is a changes to the code of practice. What I'm referring to now in this video are changes to the code of practice that the Department of Work and Pensions had to do because the ICO wasn't very happy about this new act in totality. There are further provisions, so we're going to see what that's going to be. There are also powers within Scotland. A lot of you ask me about that. Yes, there are agreements in Scotland as well. And then again, we've got more recovery from bank accounts. There's going to be under a different schedule there, and again, different qualification from driving. Now, the following provisions of the Act come into force insofar as they are not already in force. So these changes were made on the 24th of June, last month then, 2026. And then here we have another one which is here or coming in on the 26th, and that one refers to them actually charging you for recovery. So you won't just have to pay the debt back, you're going to get costs as well. So more than ever, Make sure you keep financial evidence in records along with everything else, and don't just let your bank statements be those records. Now, if you have any of my data toolkits, or indeed you're inside my membership, you will know the sorts of evidence I am advising you as somebody that has, had their fingers almost burned, because like I said, I had heart failure when I logged into my bank account, and I just thought, never again, never, ever, ever again is that going to happen to me. Particularly as I was the one that wasn't doing anything wrong. So I was doing absolutely nothing wrong. My company was not doing anything wrong. But because of this maliciousness and how it was framed, really bad. Now, currently, because of this new act, there are basically, I would say, two different legal regimes being applied. One is about eligibility of certain benefits or entitlement to public office funding, and the other one is all about fraud. Now, after looking at all of the information that there is currently about this, I asked this question, and I wonder what you guys think about this. Why is DWP, for example, applying a necessary and proportionate test to eligibility verification notices to then have access to your bank or the information that your bank holds on you, whilst retaining a completely separate reasonable suspicion threshold for criminal fraud investigations? And where does that reasonable suspicion start from? Because when they say specifically trained officers, is that a DWP work coach? Because I've worked with some of these work coaches, and I would not really consider them to be specifically trained in identifying fraud. Lots of them can't even close down their calendar at the end of the working day. This is why it is now so much more important for you to keep your own evidence, and I question where you want to put your actual money, how you protect your wealth from malicious reporting, AI that goes wrong, people making genuine mistakes at work in these offices, which is why I am really intent on looking at other types of financial assets and being a little bit more financially independent from such control over income. Because I leave you with this. If I hadn't of complied and answered the questions, and had I not have been able to have provided actual screenshots from my businesses and things like that, where the hell would my money be right now? And would I still be sitting here right now? I find this very concerning, and it's not a situation that I'm prepared to put myself or my business in ever again. So let me know what you think about this. Has this been a real shocker for you guys? And are we getting closer to 1984? Or is this, autonomy as some organisations would like us to believe? Let me know in the comments what you think about this.